Explain like I'm 5. Why are we basically never allowed to use spaces in our passwords? When making passwords, there's always restrictions, of which the most common one are spaces not allowed. Why is this? One reason is that trailing spaces are hard to notice and might cause a difficult to detect error. Any other symbol is clear to see. For example, if you copy-paste your password from one location to another, you may accidentally grab a trailing space. I believe it's a historic convention that has stayed with some modern websites applications. A lot of places don't have that restriction anymore. I am not actually sure why that convention started. It may be because spaces were used as delimiters, so having them in passwords would have been confusing. But nowadays, they are more commonly accepted, and I would actually strongly recommend that you do use them. Full sentences are typically very strong passwords. At least much better than the typical single word or name that some people use. If you can't use spaces in your password, tell your IT department they're idiots. Either it's an arbitrary restriction without a technical reason, or there is a technical reason, which means your authentication system is either extremely obsolete, or it's a homebrew system by someone who doesn't understand what they're doing. The most recent NIST password guidelines allow all ASCII Unicode characters, explicitly including spaces. Excluding spaces reduces the number of possible passwords, makes it more difficult for users to choose memorable passwords, which makes it more likely they'll write reminders to themselves and makes the system weaker overall. If a company wants to deviate from those guidelines, they should justify it. Some code doesn't recognize space as a character. Some older browsers freak out trying to understand how to interpret that. Is it 20? Is it space? Is it something else? It happens to a lot of other characters, such as A, I, O, but these are not in every language as space is. Newer code have no problem with that. This isn't really an issue anymore, but originally it was because spaces are word separators. If you don't know if the next word is a command or a past of the password, you're going to have a bad time. There isn't any technical reason. However, there are many practical reasons. Writing down a password with spaces may be confusing as to what the password is. Having spaces before or after the text cannot be written down without using quotes. Spaces are used as a separator in many data applications. Overall, spaces can be very problematic. Command line. Every character counted. Spaces were removed instead of checking for quotations on a password field that might have spaces. That standard just stuck. It's a sign that someone is using unsafe code to process the passwords or was using such code and never reviewed the restrictions. A system that handles passwords correctly can handle anything you can type. Because it is hard to see spaces at the beginning or end of a password. If you inadvertently add one space at the beginning or end, you will have a hard time understanding why your password is wrong. In C, spaces and enter are both considered white space, signifying the end of the input. Not allowing spaces makes the code easier to write, and the passwords easier to verify. My Wi-Fi password is a full sentence with spaces. Very easy to say to other people. No one has ever misspelled it. Did you not read Ender's Game? XD. It's not easy to see verify your password if there is a space prepending or appended to it. Spaces. Tabs. New lines and carriage return characters are considered as white space and used to delimit words. If you enter a space in your password, then the input routine assumes that you entered 2 words. So it rejects it. They asked you for a password, not a passphrase, which is a thing that allows spaces. So just use some other character instead of space. Also, if they allowed spaces, It makes it much easier to guess your password because now any hacker can determine that you are using words, how long the words are, and can then guess at sentences. I have ran across several large websites that won't allow you to use periods. They force you to use a special character, but it has to be a character on their list, and often a period is considered invalid and can't be used at all. It is a combination of history and paranoia. The paranoia comes not necessarily from passwords, but everywhere else where allowing spaces and then having one place not account for them properly causes problems like file names. Lots of programmers use command lines. When every time you copy and paste a folder path with spaces into a command line and hit enter too fast before you remembered to put quotes around the folder path, history is probably from back when practically everything was command lines, particularly anything that involved a server. So, spaces in anything was a PITA. I hate places that do this. While a lot of places have stopped having crazy passwords requirements, every time I see you must enter a number, a symbol, and have no spaces, it drives me nuts. I swapped to passphrases years ago, and this plays havoc with them. 4 random common word with spaces is the way to go for passwords. I work around this issue by using underscores or dashes and the like. But it is so much easier to just type the words with spaces like you type anything else. Stop restricting spaces, lol. Today we allow spaces, tomorrow tabs, next week carriage returns? Where does the madness end? If you're actually not allowed to use spaces in most of your passwords, the systems you're using suck. I use mostly grammatically correct passphrases for my passwords, at least. The ones I don't just auto-generate from alphanumeric gibberish using my password manager. And I've never run into a system that disallows spaces. I don't have anything relevant to add to the conversation, but I just wanted to say I absolutely love geeking out on the explanations here and the concepts of building a system in such a way that I always leads to the same result. Sexy AF. We've had passphrases that allow for spaces at my workplace for almost a decade now. Back when I worked the help desk, I'd always give an example of the dog is blue as an acceptable, simplistic passphrase. To this day, I'm pretty sure there are probably facilities employees that probably still use that passphrase because they didn't want to think up one themselves. Crappy legacy systems. Old systems generally only support up to 8 characters. AZAZ09. Then in newer systems where this isn't a problem anymore, the old password policies are often kept out of fear they'll break something. As an IT person, I explicitly hammer in the idea to my users or loved ones to always use spaces in their passwords. I haven't seen any somewhat modern platform not allow spaces. It even helps with people getting frustrated when trying to share their password, which subconsciously makes them do it less. Same for writing it down less and using more memorable phrases instead of weird L33T writing. After using password managers and physical keys for so long now, it's hard to imagine going back to human-readable passwords. Get with the times, peeps. You don't have to memorize any of that garbage. Embrace the giant chunks of gibberish. Fun fact: I used to use 20 URL encoded representation of a space in my password at an old job and found a bug in a web login form that changed it to a literal space so I couldn't log into it. Cold sweat smile. I've definitely had long complicated passwords with spaces. And despite reading several wrong comments here, there is no good reason there can't be spaces besides services arbitrarily deciding which symbols to allow or require.